Welcome into the Irish NFL show. We are 2 weeks away from one of the biggest events of the year in the NFL calendar, the NFL draft from Kansas City. We had Matt Miller on the show a couple of years ago, Matt Miller from ESPN, hot off the experts mock draft with all the guys on ESPN yesterday, Phil Yates and the team. Very, very interesting, very enjoyable show. Matt, it's great to have you back on the Irish NFL show.
Yeah, guys, I appreciate you having me back on. It's great to be here.
Matt, when we spoke to you last time, I know we're going back 2 years, you said that one of the enjoyable aspects of the job is the fact that every draft is quite different from one is unique to the other. Last year we didn't really have any quarterbacks. It wasn't a quarterback heavy draft. This year I suppose it's quite the opposite. We're talking about potentially four going in the top five. From your perspective and doing the job, how different do you feel this one is from previous years?
Yeah, this is definitely different from 2021 when we last spoke, or even 2022. I think that this is an easier sell. There's star power at the top of this draft. You have a Heisman Trophy winner in Bryce Young. You have C.J. Stroud, who I think even casual football fans are aware of because of the dominance he's had at Ohio State the last 2 years. Then you have, an Anthony Richardson who sets records for athletic measurables at the NFL scouting combines. And Will Levis, while maybe not the casual observer, maybe didn't know his name when the process started, he's certainly, really capable and has a lot of starter level traits. So I think this year there's a little more excitement because of the quarterbacks. And I think last year, the offseason was dominated by veteran player movement. We kept Devontae Adams gets traded, and then Russell Wilson gets traded. And the draft was kind of almost an afterthought to free agency and the trade market, which was the first time in my career that's ever happened. So I think this year we've got a lot of star power with the quarterbacks, with Will Anderson, with Jalen Carter, and that makes it a little bit more fun of a draft to talk to, the general public about.
Story broke in the last hour. I'm not sure if you picked up on it, that suggesting the Texans aren't locked into a quarterback at two, and maybe Will Anderson will be the pick. But I just want to quickly ask you about the two quarterbacks, because last month at the Pro Days, we saw the Panthers being very on top of things in terms of around CJ Stroud. You saw the footage of Frank Reich being there, and obviously the conversations afterwards. And at that stage, it looked like it's CJ Stroud essentially is number one. And we see this with a lot of drafts. Come March, it's that particular player. Gradually, as we get closer to the draft, things kind of evolve and change. And we've seen over the past week, Bryce Young now seems to be the general consensus number one. Are you surprised how this has evolved and moved around again? Do you think there's another twist with the 1 and 2 pick?
I'm not surprised, because this is, I think the longer you're in this business, the more you learn how often this happens. We'll go back to 2021. The 49ers trade up to number 3 overall. And the immediate intel was that it was for Mac Jones. And so, myself and a lot of other people, you jump on that and say, hey, we've heard it's for Mac Jones. In the 6 weeks that follow that, they changed their mind. And it was because of a pro day workout with Trey Lance, where they got to spend more time with him. They saw the upside and the ability, and they changed their mind, which it's their free to do that. So I think with Carolina, when they made the trade up, it was with the understanding that there were two guys they liked, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. And they knew they had almost 2 months to make that decision on which player they wanted. So now, as we get through the pro days, they've spent time with the quarterbacks. We're into the private workout season, which is almost over. So you're getting even more time with the quarterbacks. The Carolina Panthers are obviously, very big on analytics. We've heard about the S2 cognition test and how well Bryce Young did on the test. So I think you start to look at those things and say, okay, here's how they formulated that opinion. Here's how they've come to that decision. There are still 2 weeks as we're sitting here talking, so they can maybe change their mind again. But I think that's why we see all signs point in one direction now, whereas, at the combine, it was more wide open.
Sweet. So I just wanted to ask, so with the safety class this year seems a little bit shallow, and one of the days that kind of devastated me a lot was when we saw J.L. Skinner go down with the torn pectoral. I was just curious, how do you think an injury like that affects him on draft boards compared to like a torn Achilles or like a torn ACL? Because he was kind of a player I viewed as like a top 75, easily I think a top 100 player. And now, with that, he hasn't gotten to do a lot of the pre-draft stuff that I think he would have excelled at. Where do you think he's kind of at in the minds of a lot of teams?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it depends on when you have a player injury, it depends on where you were originally ranked. If you're a first round player and you get hurt, most times you're still a first-round player. Just maybe you might go a little bit later. Cedric Ogbuehi coming out of Texas A&M is the example I always use of still goes first round. So you're still okay there. I think when you get into guys who are, let's use your example. Let's say he was a round 3 player. You have a pec injury. I mean, your turnaround time on that could be 4 to 6 months. So it'll probably cost you a round or two. I think is reasonable. Obviously, Achilles is a year. It's a year, and then you're not the same for 2 years. So that one
Right.
is sometimes devastating. ACLs, it feels like they're all different now, but there's like a 6-month time frame on an ACL anymore. It feels like so. I think you don't want to get hurt. Obviously, if you were going to get hurt, I think a pec injury is one, especially for a defensive back. You're a little bit okay with that. If he was an offensive lineman, it'd be different. But because you're a defensive back, you want to stay away from the lower body injuries, obviously. So an upper body injury, you don't hold your breath quite as much. So if I had to guess right now, I would say it probably drops him a round or two. Maybe somewhere 45 picks from where he would have originally been selected.
Right.
Matt, Northwestern played in Dublin last August against Nebraska, the first game of the college season, and we were fortunate we were there and we got to witness Peter Skoronski, and it was very evident in that particular game how far above he was other players on the field. Huge contingent of Chicago Bears fans here in Ireland as well. They're picking 9 after the trade. General consensus from Bears fans, it's going to be offensive line. If you were to to call it between Paris Johnson and Skoronski, like, which one do you see as the better fit there? And do you think the Bears are locked in for an offensive line?
I don't think they're locked in. I think it makes a lot of sense, but I don't think they're locked in because Ryan Poles is going to look at value. I remember last year, everyone thought they would take a receiver in the second round. They took 2 defensive backs. So I think one thing Poles has taught us is he's always going to look at value over positional need and try not to back yourself into a corner where you have to take a certain position in a certain round. I like Peter Skoronski a little bit better for that, physical run game that they're putting together there. You have a defensive head coach. You're probably going to always rely a little bit more on, being able to punish defensive linemen. Whereas Paris Johnson is a really good player. He's more of, a finesse offensive tackle, doesn't always, want to get dirty. Peter Skoronski has, the Nebraska game is a great example. He has tape where he just looks like he's mad at the whole world and is taking it out on the defensive lineman in front of him. So that's a resume game for him where you can go back and watch that game, the Ohio State game, and really see how special he is. So again, I don't know that they're locked in at 9, but that pick to me will be about what value is there.
You look at his footage and I suppose the holes in which he's able to put in position with the running backs, it's significant. And it's not just the course of that particular game in Dublin. As you said, there's other games throughout the course of the season, consistent play and gaping holes for the running backs to get through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, the Dublin game, side note, I was watching that game with my wife and she's like, have you ever been to Ireland? I was like, no, I want to go badly, never been. And during that game, we booked flights to Dublin because it's like, we got to go, we got to go. And it's funny. So I have Northwestern and Nebraska to thank for my post-draft vacation this year.
It's not the Notre Dame game in August, is it by any chance, man?
No, I wish. No, I didn't look at the schedule very well, guys. It was an impulsive decision. So no, I'll be there in June instead.
Do you see Skoronski succeeding as a tackle in the league? Do you think he's going to have to shift inside? And do you think that might affect the Bears' decision at all, considering they kind of have, I'd say, 3 bodies right now? They're kind of rotating around a guard, arguably 4.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I think he can be okay at tackle. It's just a matter of he could be very, very good at guard or good at tackle. It's Zach Martin. You guys mentioned Notre Dame. Zach Martin was the same way coming out of college. So I actually look, and I might be an outlier here. And in 2 weeks, Ryan Poles could, say that he completely disagrees with this take. I don't think the Bears offensive line is as bad as a lot of people are afraid of right now. I did a study on Braxton Jones, the left tackle, who graded out actually a little bit higher than Orlando Brown Jr., who was the starting left tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs and just got a ton of money to go to the Cincinnati Bengals. And Jones was a 5th-round pick. He'll be a second-year player, so he's very inexpensive. There's a lot of upside there as he gets more comfortable in the scheme and as they put better players around him, which we saw, additions and free agency of Nate Davis is going to help, certainly. So I thought Tevin Jenkins came on strong last year as well. So it's like, I kind of look at it as like, do you want to mess up what started to look really good? Now, if it's at center, if there's, okay, we want to draft the center in the 2nd or 3rd round, I think that would make a lot more sense. But, Frankie, to your original question, yeah, I think Skoronski can play anywhere. I've talked to teams that think he could play center, which is Cody Whitehair was a tackle at K-State that eventually got bumped inside to both spots. So there's a precedent there. But my hope is he goes somewhere, can play left tackle because he's done that at such a high level.
Awesome. And then I guess other question. After the success of Tariq Woolen last year, it seems like kind of he was one of the main success stories. Guy drafted late, but kind of I feel like a lot of the draft community, if you will, on Twitter, but also just a lot of people in general fell in love with him throughout the entire draft process. Do you think that'll kind of shift at all how GMs look at some of those maybe smaller schools, some of those lesser known, maybe lesser tape, lesser competition faced, but high athleticism guys? And then do you think there's any guys like that this year that would really stand out as someone who can maybe be that late round flyer, that 5th round flyer that just has these standout traits that can get coached into a top end outside DB?
Yeah, so I do think that traits will always supersede almost everything. I think we see that all the time, right? It's like guys who are super trait heavy, which Woolen was, tall, long, fast. I mean, he was checking every box other than level of competition. And so I think that's where you see him, go in the 4th round, you're like, okay, there's, you could understand the transition, especially once he went to Seattle, where he's just so tailor-made for what they do from a scheme perspective. So I think that fit him really well. As far as like a day 3 guy, I would say Darrell Luter Jr. from South Alabama would probably be my pick there. Someone who has the traits and then has the athleticism, to be an NFL player. Obviously not as big as Tariq Woolen was last year. I think he came in right at 6 foot, 186 pounds, but long arms, huge hands, vertical explosion, short area quickness. So he would be my pick from that. If you want to try to find a starting corner, which there were several rookie starters from day 3 in the NFL this past year, I think Luter could be one of those.
Yeah, I love it. He had some fun Senior Bowl reps from what I remember.
Absolutely. Yep.
Matt, I suppose Witherspoon and Gonzalez seem to be the 2 marquee cornerbacks. If you look at most mock drafts, they're going in, anything beyond 5 to 6 in that general, obviously with the Lions making that trade during the week. Is the drop-off significant to Joey Porter Jr. and then the likes of Forbes and Turner? Because we just keep continuing to see Witherspoon and Gonzalez across every mock draft at the upper end.
Yeah, I think teams see it as Witherspoon and Gonzalez are in a tier by themselves, then Joey Porter Jr. in a group by himself, and then a drop off, like you said, to Deontay Banks, Emmanuel Forbes, and then another drop off, to guys like DJ Turner. I think you could put Tyreek Stevenson from Miami in that group. Keely Ringo, depending on what scheme you play, could fit into that group as well. Julius Brents from Kansas State. So it is not the deepest corner class that we've seen. I think you talk to teams, there's probably going to be 5 drafted in the 1st round. I think it would be a surprise to see more than that. So those 2 at the top because of how well they played this past year. And then, like we were talking about, the traits that Gonzalez brings to the table are really, really special. So I think that's why we see them talked about in a group of their own. JPJ only had 1 pick in college, and he's aggressive. He's always around the ball. He was very, very physical, but I think that, fact of only 1 interception is pushing him down a little bit.
So 2 guys I feel like I've seen consistently like ranked high, but I've also kind of been a little unsure what to really think of them is Felix Anudike, Ozama, and then Keon White out of Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
Those are 2 kind of, I think, really high potential, but a little bit more projection-based, I'd say, prospects when you're looking at what they're going to be able to do at the next level. But I see them consistently ranked high in your rankings, whether it's McShay's rankings, whoever. Can you just speak to those 2 as prospects and kind of maybe where they're going to fit a little bit better in the league?
Yeah, I think Keon White is, work in progress. Being a former tight end, being a transfer from Old Dominion, he's kind of a tweener body type. It's 280 pounds, but he moves exceptionally well. I think you referenced the Senior Bowl. He had a great Senior Bowl week where he showed that he was comfortable playing in space. Even taking some zone drops. So I see Keon White late 1st round. If there's run on pass rushers, I could see him slotting in there. But I think he's someone that you have to mold a little bit. And I do wonder if we're going to see teams kick him inside at times and let him play as a 3 technique because of the size, because of the quick first step. He's not the bendiest edge rusher you're ever going to see. So putting him in some, Michael Bennett type situations. I know he's quite a bit taller than Michael Bennett was, but, trying to work that outside inside rotation to get him reps, against tackles and guards would be smart. And then with Felix, he plays just up the road from where I live, so I've seen him play a ton. I think he's just really consistent, and the technique is good. The traits aren't so fantastic that you're like blown away by his first step, or you're blown away by the way he, gets into tackles and has him backpedaling. It's not really that. It's just he consistently shows up, and he's good against the pass. He's good against the run. So to me, he's kind of like George Karlaftis was last year, where he might not be super twitchy, but he's really smart and he's always in on the play and he's got a great motor, and you just know that you're getting a really solid defensive end. He's never going to lead the league in sacks probably, but he's just a really solid starter.
Love that.
Matt, Hendon Hooker's an intriguing one because I suppose for large parts of the offseason, he's kind of in the kind of second round kind of general direction. But over the course of the last 3 weeks, he's also found his way into this first round conundrum. You know, we've seen some people have him up as far as 5 or 6. And I know it's not comparable to Malik Willis last year, where for large parts of the offseason, people felt he was a first round pick. He goes in the third. How have you put your footage together of Hendon Hooker? What's your expectations for him?
Yeah, I think late first is possible. I wouldn't say probable. It's interesting because when you talk to teams, no one is willing to say we have a first round grade on Hendon Hooker, but everyone will say I could see him going first because of the needs, whether that be the Detroit Lions or Seattle Seahawks looking for a quarterback of the future, the Minnesota Vikings looking for a quarterback of the future, the Baltimore Ravens and their whole situation being what it is with Lamar Jackson. So I think with Hendon, he's a very talented player. Obviously you're going to have questions about the scheme he's played in and the fact that it doesn't translate very well to the NFL. I would push back and say he had success at Virginia Tech as well. So he's had success in two very different schemes. But I think there's the idea that there are so many teams that need a quarterback, and he's the next guy on the list. So it could push him up. Like you said, same with Malik Willis last year. It didn't happen. Jalen Hurts was that player. It didn't happen. But Lamar Jackson was that guy, and it did happen. So there are, also some examples of where teams will feel like they need that fifth-year option or they need a future guy, and they will kind of reach down in the second round and pull a quarterback up a little bit.
A trade down scenario maybe for one team. Like I look at
Bucks
at 19. Bucks at
Yep.
19, maybe trading down and picking them up late in the first or 80 seconds.
I don't know that the Bucks will because of Kyle Trask, and then feel how you feel about Baker Mayfield, but they've got two guys there. But I think that would be a good situation for him. Same with if Detroit at 18 or Seattle at 20, if you can trade back and get some extra draft capital and then take a Hendon Hooker, I think that is probably a much more comfortable situation than just saying at 18 or 20, we're going to draft this player who's not going to play for us for a year and is already 25 years old.
So touching back onto like Anthony Richardson, a lot of it will be obviously, where he ends up landing, who's going to be the coach that's going to end up kind of working him through. He's not as much of a work in progress, I think, as a lot of the public believes, but, he is going to definitely need some assistance, year 1, year 2, kind of figuring things out. Where do you think is like the best landing spot for him necessarily out of some of the rumored teams?
I would love to see him go to the Tennessee Titans. There's no way he'll make it to 11, but I would love to see him with Mike Vrabel. And I think the different ways that they would scheme him up, whether it be as a runner or a passer. So I think that would be a fun fit for him. I think Indy would be, I wish the Indianapolis Colts had a quarterback that he could play behind for just a little bit. Like if they still had Jacoby Brissett and they could let Anthony Richardson play behind him for a little bit, that would be awesome, because I think Shane Steichen could scheme it up. We saw it with what he did with Jalen Hurts in Philly. So those are probably the two fits that I, just on paper like the best for Anthony. But I think he's such a unique talent that anywhere that's going to let him learn and work on his mechanics, and just he's played so little football. He just needs time to be around the game more and get some mental reps, get some QB2 reps. So, I think Seattle would be fun as well. That'd be great, with the weapons they have. So there's a lot of landing spots that I think would work for him.
Matt, as a Giants fan, I think this year most Giants fans' general consensus is it's going to be a wide receiver at at the 25th pick in the first round. And it seems to be a general 4 or 5 wide receivers in that kind of ballpark. Each mock draft you look at, like is Zay Flowers, like Jaden Hyatt is an intriguing one because again, similar. I've seen him kind of mocked in early second, but he seems like a real deep ball threat, and that's essentially something that the Giants are missing. Like, if you're looking at the players, which one do you think would fit into Dable's scheme the best?
Yeah, I think Dable and then Mike Kafka, who's in Kansas City, who always had success with, smaller guys. And they specifically targeted vertical speed with, Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman. Kafka was gone, but you get Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney in there as well. So I think both those players are obviously a fit. I would lean more towards Zay Flowers just because of what his alignment at BC. He played everywhere. He played outside, slot. He was in the backfield at times. He's just, I think, a more well-rounded football player at this point. I think with Zay, the thing you worry about is 170 pounds at the Shrine Bowl, 183 pounds at the Combine. Where's he going to play at? As much as we talked about Bryce Young's weight, 5'9", 170 is a lot different than 5'9", 183 in the NFL because of are you going to get absolutely controlled at the line of scrimmage or not? And if you're playing, at a smaller weight or really maybe anywhere for Zay Flowers, you're going to have to scheme him separation. Otherwise, he's just going to get locked up at the line of scrimmage. So I think that is probably the biggest question with his tape is he's dynamic. He's very explosive, but it's the concern about the size for me.
So then I was curious. So with the tight end class, it seems like there's just this tight end class is absolutely awesome. It seems like there's a possibility that we could see like 3 to 5 guys go in the top 50 selections. How many do you think go in the first round? Because I mean, it seems like the trend over the past few years. I mean, you look back at like Hawkinson ended up getting traded. You see Noah Fant end up getting traded. It feels like these first round tight ends, no matter how dominant they were in college, no matter how good of prospects they look like, and not trying to say these guys aren't, becoming better players now, but it seems like they don't necessarily work out for the team that ends up drafting them. How do you think that kind of balances out this year? Do you think it still kind of stays on the same course it's always been? Do you think there will be more tight ends possibly selected in the first?
That's a great question. It's something I've been struggling with myself. I think we'll see 2 in the first round. And you're right. There's a lot of talent at that position. I think that actually works against the tight end class because do you feel like you have to draft Dalton Kincaid in the top 15 if you can get Luke Musgrave or Sam Laporta in the second round? And so, outside of, Kincaid is special because of his, running ability, his ability to find space. And then there's guys like Darnell Washington who are just, enormous human beings that are different than everyone else in the world. And Michael Mayer is a really well-rounded player, but I think all those guys that you would say are first-round talents, they have a corollary, and they could be a second or third-round pick. So that is one thing I will actively be tracking during the draft is do the tight ends go early because they're good players, or do they go a little bit later because there are so many of them?
Matt, it's a strange time for running backs across the league. You see in free agency, the contracts that were handed out weren't anything significant. We've seen the Giants kind of scale back from negotiating with Saquon, and he's not going to sign the tag. And I suppose try to keep whatever leverage you can to get a contract before the season starts. Bijan Robinson obviously is the marquee one. You've got Gibbs, second to him. Like, do you think teams are kind of reluctant to go high on a running back because the value seems to kind of the whole dynamic in the league has changed where teams have recognised that you can take a running back in the 5th round, 6th round and still be productive. We saw in the Super Bowl the Chiefs' bell cow was a 7th round pick. Like, do you think teams are going to be reluctant as good as Bijan Robinson is? People are suggesting he's the nearest thing to Adrian Peterson we've seen, but where is he, 50 and beyond, something along those lines?
Probably so, 15 and beyond, just because of I think early in the draft you want to stick to premium positions, quarterbacks, pass rushers, left tackles, corners, maybe wide receivers. Those are the top spots, the blue chip positions. So the early part of the draft can be dominated by those because the way the game's changed. But I think Bijan is so talented that you almost make an exception. Someone will make that exception of, we don't draft first round running backs, but this guy's so good. And, I've used the argument before of he's going to be very inexpensive. Let's just say he's drafted at 16. He's very inexpensive. You have that contract for 5 years. You can throw a $10 million franchise tag on him to control him for a 6th year. By that time, he's 28 years old. You have 6 years of what I think can be best running back in the NFL production. And then you can start over. But I think if you can put a check mark next to any position on your roster for 6 years, you feel pretty good about being able to do that.
So the last one for me. So like this receiver class is pretty interesting because I feel like there's not necessarily those few elite talents, but there's so many guys I'd say that could end up in that like top 50, top 75 range that I think are going to be quality pros. You talk about guys like Cedric Tillman, you talk about guys like Josh Downs, just a few off the top of my head, like, Jonathan Mingo, who would be your pick of like a guy that's going to end up going on day 2, day 3 that you think is going to be the most successful maybe out of that group?
Yeah, you listed a lot of the ones that I would have said. I like Josh Downs a lot from North Carolina. I know he's a slot only guy. I mean, not only in terms of size, but like that's all he did at North Carolina was playing the slot. But I'm a believer in his ability. As much as we talked about Zay Flowers and Jalen Hyatt, I think Josh Downs is a similar type player who had production. He has traits. I mean, the speed is there. He's slippery, vertical stretchability. So there's a lot. I like Cedric Tillman at Tennessee a lot as well. I think people forgot about him because of the ankle injury, but I'm a big Josh Downs fan too.
Okay.
Matt, 2 weeks tonight, it'll all be revealed with the first round. A few more days of analysis for you thereafter. You might get a winner and break. But again, look, we really appreciate you giving up your time today to join us on the Irish NFL show. We always enjoy your company. It's great to have you on again.
Okay. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great day.
Thanks, man.